Warning: the contents of this video covers files that were potentially obtained from cybercrime, counterfeiting and IP use without permission, possession and distribution of thereof. The video contains no legal advice. Please follow and be advised on local customs and laws. On the 17th of October 2023, Twitter and other social medias lit up for a few days on a potential hack or data leak of Bandai Hobby Department CAD files that were used for the manufacture of Gundam models or Gunpla. The source is believed to be of Japanese origin, with screenshots of parts displayed in a 3D rendered display space. The 19th of November, the Bandai Namco game Gundam Metaverse downloads and play was suspended. Pop culture and media game outlets assumed and publicized that it is in response to the leak 2 days prior, and that the leak contained said CAD files. The reason why I'm making this video, besides being angered and quite annoyed with the misinformation, is to 1. Clear up misconceptions and utilize correct terminology. 2. Out of interest, study the various media leaks and photos of said files, and even analyze the files for its potential use in counterfeiting, 3D printing and general hobby use, plus the general effect. I'll be looking at this through the lens of a mechanical engineer and 3D printer hobbyist scale modeler. Lastly, if you wish to obtain the files, I cannot directly give them to you, but the references and sources in the description section will point you for a magna link or modified versions of the meshes that have been heavily modified. Details through the video. The 6th of October, the Gundam Metaverse game had an early release with full release during the 12th. It is alleged that the downloadable game files were not encrypted and PSX files were extracted and explored. These screenshots are said meshes that were contained in these files. The 17th of October, said raw files were spread with screenshots of meshes depicting Gundam's Gundam parts, slicing G-code, and 3D printed examples. What we failed or did not see was any evidence that these came directly from the downloadable files or was any sort of Bandai assets, gaming or engineering departments. Cited or seen any individual CAD files or meshes of runners, tooling, molds or CNC G-code. As an early warning, this video is going to contain a lot of speculation, information that I've collected across social media, and then my 2 cents on top of that. My quick take: I do not believe these to be Bandai Hobby Division assets. The most important thing to know about this issue is the difference between a CAD file and mesh. There are many methods, suites and programs that can create 3D files across many different file types, and the most universal translating and jumping formats are mesh files, most notably OBJ or STL. These are extremely common from animation to gaming and all levels of amateur modeling, sculpting, mesh mixing and 3D printing. CAD, computer drafted aiding, is more colloquially known as solid model, where you have data that contains the surface and inside of the material that gives a watertight object that's appropriate for many type of applications and will give you the least amount of issues. It is a very steep learning curve and can be quite difficult to master, some of the software being inaccessible or very expensive and very difficult to learn, requiring a university level qualification and training. These solid files are very smooth and contain quite a bit of data and very appropriate for production and tooling, even in the use of CNC and the creation creation of molds. Not to say with the G code, or the code that uses to translate from the file or model to data where a CNC or 3D printer creates it, you could input a mesh, which we'll eventually cover. The Bandai hobby division, showcased in many of their YouTube documentaries on the Bandai factory in Shizuoka and other locations, can be clearly seen using Autodesk products or the program Inventor to form all of its parts, which are proprietary and expertly crafted to take all sorts of tolerance at microns or less for a very fine fit of polystyrene to snap fit and have articulation among each other. They've been developing this well over 40 years. This data is fed into a very expensive CNC machine that produces small brass molds that are handcrafted and polished and then set into a steel block for large specialty injection molding machines only found in Japan, and create very large runners that were able to chop up and snap fit together. It's never been known for these files to be leaked, but if you look at the 3D printing Gundam community and the bootlegging community, many engineers can also recreate runners and injection molding tooling, or even pretty well forming 3D printed files. With an existing Bandai model, you can also reverse engineer and use a cheaper injection molding machine and make your own models, which we've seen from multiple manufacturers across East Asia. Back to these PSX files, we've seen a lot of meshes from a ton of Gundams across a spectrum of a screen, and a couple of Gundams covered in multicolored parts that pull apart and showcase parts that snap fit and look very similar to a plastic scale model. I'm not an expert on gaming and can't talk about how the files work in a video game in tandem to code and programming, though you can use solid or mesh models. Mesh, the data only covering the surface, can be sculpted, or a process similar to CAD. It is potential that data has been captured off the Bandai hobby division solid models into a mesh and transferred and modified into an object or STL file, and then again translated into a PSX file, or created from scratch in a suite that is very suitable for making mesh files for animation and video games. Bandai is also known for, in animation promos, to showcase models being dismantled and put back together to sell the model kits games or the concept of Gunpla. In the data hack leak is a collection of many types of models, some of very low poly and not high quality, to a Gundam file that has a few quality models that can be bisected and turned into multiple parts. A closer inspection to these high quality parts shows breakages in the mesh, as well as a much higher poly that you would not see in a Bandai tooling or a CAD file. If you were to convert files multiple times, especially in a suite like Blender, you're going to change the data so many times, any form of tolerance, detail and poly count is going to change so significantly, it's not the same thing anymore if it was a Bandai asset or not. At this stage, it is absolutely impossible to tell. In the reference of talking about mesh models all this time and a data only covering the surface area, instead of showing smooth contours or the non-existence of anything round, smooth or spheres, it is just a count of polygons matched together. It can be so fine you don't pick it up with the eye or anything. Are these files of any use, and is this data leak a big deal? Is the bootleggers going to be able to create model kits out of this? Is it going to affect the bottom line of Bandai? Honestly, these are all good questions which we'll get to the bottom of it, and afterwards we're going to explore the files and meshes and how to sort them out for yourself. As a PSX file, it can be converted to a fairly standard mesh file and utilized for many fan private applications, from VR chat to making animations, fan projects, memes, whatnot. Very flexible, just rigging texture, needs to be applied, even reference studied and mixed to make your own. As a 3D file, it has limited use, but it's not too bad. It does give us a catalogue of Gundams that do not yet exist in the modelling realm of Cults and Thingiverse, where fans have already made their own free to download garage kits and other assets that are even for sale, like garage models at a trading event. One of the most difficult and hardest thing in the 3D modelling world is working on meshes or models made by other people that have a different work process. A small error can very quickly turn into a big one and an unusable model. These can also be sliced and cause some sort of mesh breakage issues that do affect the print quality. The single models for whatever purpose or miniatures are fine, especially printed small at a wargaming scale or diorama. Once we're getting to the models that break up and assemble like Gundam kits, it's going to utilize so much effort, resin, slicing and whatnot. It's going to be an immense amount of work if you wish to attempt it. To look at the tolerances, joins and whatnot to reverse engineer and make your own add-ons or kits, I suppose it could also be possible, but you can also study existing kits of calipers and put that in your own drafting software. On that note, you cannot under any circumstances convert it back to a solid or a CAD file and feed it in a way where you can make your own runners, tooling, mold or that sort of thing. Can go into a CNC machine or G-code, but it's going to be a lot of referencing and redrafting, which you may as well reverse engineer and make it from scratch. So with the amount of immense work and the low quality, I do not see the Chinese bootleggers having any interest in this whatsoever. Is this a big deal to make a media fuss about it? I mean, on Bandai's side in the gaming division, any sort of data leak or loss of assets is a big deal to the individuals and department involved with company policies on data retention and privacy. It's very likely that someone could potentially be disciplined or lose their job over it, or even the original people who extracted and shared their files can also get in quite a bit of legal trouble. Historically speaking though, data leaks from video game assets happen all the time and is very frequent. Most models that you find on Thingiverse, especially from creators with inconsistent quality and subject matters of models, are mostly just ripped, edited and uploaded for quick, easy, low poly 3D printing. There's nothing wrong with these assets. People have been using them for a very long time and they're utilized in fan and dodgily semi-commercial projects for quite a long time. I have dipped my toes and acquired some questionable STLs that are 3D downloadable and 3D printed, repainted and modeled. Little bit concerned about some of those Pokemon meshes what I've done life-size prints of that Eevee. Now, affecting Bandai from a bottom line point of view, their catalogue of Gundam kits is absolutely immense, with a cult following and consumer base that loves the products and the existing hobby as is, where the use of 3D printers, the learning curve and the amount of work to prepare the parts to 3D print scale and the purchase of material, these files are only going to be of any sort of benefit or at least mild amusement to a very small minority of people in the hobby and community. In conclusion, this is really not a big deal, and unless you're very well versed in 3D modeling, the files are very much not of any use to you, most likely. If you wish to learn more and be able to work around these files, I found this wonderful Fortran thread that came to the same conclusion I did through the view of a mechanical engineer and 3D draftsperson. With the use of Blender, a open source 3D modeling visualization drafting program that purely works in mesh and an extension file, GitHub IO Scene PSK PSA pack is a third-party extension that makes these files editable and viewable. They also made the file available via a Magda link and a BitTorrent, uTorrent downloadable shareware that is regularly seeded, and with their point of view and beliefs in freedom of information and sharing, they're going to most likely keep that up for a while. Unfortunately, the thread has been nuked and unarchived, though if you hunt around you'll find further discussions and other outlets to be shared. I would not be surprised if these files do become available post-processed and ready to download from all sorts of point of views online. Remember the name of the file and keep an eye on Google. That's how I found this source. PSK Model 7Z or Gundam PSK, just shy of 400 meg. Finally, looking at the actual file, there are 5 directories in the main download with multiple directories covering from weapons and heads, parts and backpacks to entire posed mobile suits of fairly decent to very low poly. These are only accessible on a very recent download of Blender Studios. With the GitHub extension, there's good tutorials on YouTube how to set that up. The files were opened via upload and PSX extension. These files can be exported by saving the individual mesh as a Blender project, reopening it and exporting it as an OBJ. Immediately, I've noticed a few things depending on the directory. They're all very different. These parts have no fillets or any form of rigid slopes for molding. They are scaled incredibly tiny and with a lot of very sharp edges that you will never find on a model kit part. These differ from file to file, making me believe that this is more of a collection from various sources and potential data leaks. From the screenshots I've seen across social media, there may be a few files floating around with different models in them. From another directory, we have posed mobile suits like this SD piece. Fascinating and rich texture, though again, something you would necessarily see on a model that would be painted on or stickers. There is the appearance of joints, but I think that's more for show with very little gap and no seam lines. For example, I found a set of Freedom Wings in the leak that matches this combined Freedom model that was downloaded off Thingiverse. This would have been a leak from many years prior, as the upload is multiple years old. The models that we are most interested in are in the file Gundams. There are several meshes, including Aerial, a Freedom, and an RX-78. These are the ones that pack the most data and able to be pulled apart with internal structure joints and would appear to look like a model kit or CAD data. It is all in one layer or a single piece and needs to be dissected. The instructions on the 4chan post outlines: click on a model and swap from viewing mode to edit mode and select all vertices. Mark them all as sharp. Press RMB merge by distance, then P by loosen parts. I'm very new to Blender and not a big fan of meshes or this particular platform, that it is vital as it has the tools to view these files and convert them, which is a necessary evil. Attempting a few times, I've had success in selecting enough poly or joints to highlight a part and using the move command to separate. I also read that turning it into its own individual part or layer makes the process a lot interesting. I fell in a few faults where I got these weird stretchy components. Removing the part, I do see internal components and the high possibility in dismantling this. And each of the models are being worked on by people on the 4chan thread, with parts of the Aerial and the entirety of the Freedom being released, including in my care. It is an immense amount of tedious work, and I absolutely take my hats off to the people doing the hard work and releasing these files for everyone to use and share. bit concerned that someone, if not the original person that did the work, is attempting to sell it. Most likely going to get a lot of negative attention from Bandai and possible repercussions, a lot like the 3D printing Warhammer community, where a lot of fan works are going to get struck and removed off the internet. That's a completely different controversy and topic for another day. There is a potential that the origin of these meshes are from hobby department assets, but it's been changed hands and converted and meshed and moved around to the point where it's not quite the same. But there is enough tolerance and evidence that a few people have 3D printed them, including those trusted and close to me, that managed to assemble and make them work as static and potentially articulated models. Part 2, I'm going to scale and 3D print this aerial head and make a bust. The other files I've also run through a 3D printer and showed the more sloppier meshes with less detail. When scaled, it does look pretty convincing in 1/144 scale, and potentially and easily can be fit, pinned or pegged to a kit. With this Hakushiki backpack, there is a spill straight out of the mesh that goes straight to the plate, and leaving a large slag of resin that would be tricky to repair and pick up, or an auto repair losing a significant amount of detail. This one wasn't too bad, where I was able to print it and may utilize it later on. Even at the very worst and near unusable end, it's still pretty cool, and everything is absolutely usable, as long as you're aware of the limitations, the amount of work, the equipment, and the costs involved. I'll always stand by and highly recommend that working and re-meshing, mixing other people's 3D models are overly way too much work and not worth it. The investment of learning how to 3D model or sculpt is invaluable, and there'll never be enough 3D modelers out there. The work that's produced specially for 3D printing will always be better than anything scanned, captured, or pulled from other mediums. There is no feeling better than getting what you've designed or imagined digitally and then producing it as a 3D printed item in your hand. This pretty much wraps up my thoughts and feelings about this. I've also noticed on the second thread formed on 4chan, they're continuing to go through all of those files, and there's also been more data leaks, breaches, or hacks from other games like Gundam Breaker that is milling around and made available. Have a look at Cult and Thingiverse. There's a bunch available, old and now, and they're already pre-converted, fixed, and ready to go in a 3D printable and readable file type like OBJ or STL. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay tuned for further content, and we'll catch you guys later. See ya!